Hello, welcome back to Intermediate Writing, Intermediate Composition. Professor Kent Lee here. Last time I talked about different kinds of sources, and some of this might be familiar if you took my writing class last spring. And sorry for the repetition, but I've decided to bring that content into this course because I think it's really important for this class, for everybody, because most students in this department have to take this class. So, we talked about different kinds of sources. And while a lot of writing teachers simply distinguish general sources and academic sources, I think that's not accurate or helpful. I think that there's a three-way distinction. It's more of a spectrum. Sometimes there are kind of gray areas between these categories. So at one end, you've got the heavy academic sources. And if you're a college student, many of those are probably too hard for you to understand. Some of them maybe. There may be some easier academic sources that you've been exposed to in your advanced college courses, third and fourth year college courses. A lot of it may be too technical for you. Then you have professional sources, which are the kinds of things that I think are often what you'll cite in college papers. They're things that you can understand generally and you actually use in college papers. Things like these books by experts. They're writing about fields where they are experts, but they're writing for a more general audience to explain things at a level that most educated people can understand. Things like this. Then you have your your very general popular sources, your entertainment magazines and entertainment books, commercially oriented books that are published just to make money by people who are not necessarily experts. So I want to come back to the professional sources, this kind of middle ground. So again, that includes trade publications or trade journals that are specific to certain occupations, publications, magazines like by business experts for people in a particular business, by psychology experts for people in, say, psychology-related fields, including education, trade journals by professional educators and linguists for, teachers, for language teachers, things like that. News sites. Now, I want to talk about news sources today. News outlets. So, news outlet, that's like kind of a big media source, big media company, news outlet. And I've got some listed on my book. I'll talk about the examples on page 104 in my book first, and then also a few more on my website, the course website. So I've got some here. Do you think, let's say the first one, CNN, do you think that's really a good source? It's so-so. It's mediocre. They don't do really detailed, in-depth coverage a lot of times, especially on their website. And I think compared to some of these other sources, CNN is not as good because CNN started as a cable news network. Now, if you look at some of these other sources, they started out as, and are primarily known as, newspapers, high-quality newspapers or news magazines, or other news services. And some of those tend to be the better ones. So some of the world famous ones. So I've got some here. Let's see. BBC News actually is a little bit better than CNN in terms of the depth and quality oftentimes, and more investigative reporting. But okay. New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, Guardian. Those are some world famous news sources. They have a good reputation. They are known for the depth and quality of their news reporting, and not only news, but also news analysis, analytical pieces. So, for example, they do investigative reporting. They are, they have reporters who are, who do their own kind of special investigations and uncover new things, like, this politician is doing something really dirty. They do investigative reporting. They do really professional, in-depth reporting. These reporters tend to be experts in their field in that they have worked in a particular field of news for a long time, like European news or North American business news or international finance news or IT technology news and things like that. So the reporters and editors have some expertise in their particular area of knowledge, and you can, when they post their articles online, you can see the reporter's name and click on the reporter's name and see the kinds of articles and news this particular journalist has been doing over his or her career. You can find out. So most of the time, these are reputable news sources, world famous news magazines, newspapers. And also Business Insider. We'll talk about business news in a little bit. Now, I also have what are called wire services. Reuters, and it's pronounced like that because it's a German name, and Associated Press, or AP. Now, these have been around for a long time. These are wire services or news services. Nowadays, they do have their websites, but in the past, before the internet, they didn't have radio or TV or print versions for the public. Basically, these are they're basically international news services. They have journalists all over the world who collect news, and they would send it by wire, that is telegraph. And this is like decades ago, when really the fastest way to transmit news from one country to another was by wire or telegraph and other such services. It was much faster than, say, sending a video, which was really slow back then. The technology wasn't there for fast video transmission. So if there's something really big happening in Spain, well, their journalist in Spain would write up the full detailed story, and it would go by wire to, say, New York. And then the TV news, the big national network news, they would get this right away from Reuters and Associated Press, and they would just read it on the air. So a lot of times, big TV news services, radio news services, they would get some of their news contents directly from wire services. Some of it's from their own reporters, but also from wire services, and as well as kind of smaller newspapers. They would get their news from wire services. So Reuters and AP have been around for a long time. They have journalists all over the world. Now they have websites where they also put up their information for the public, and you can get news directly from them. It tends to be pretty detailed. It focuses more on just news. Some of these other news services, New York Times, Washington Post, major news networks that have also internet sites like ABC News from the US. They also provide analysis by experts, analysis pieces by expert journalists, or they might bring in an outside expert, like a professor in foreign affairs from, some university, to provide some expert commentary and analysis in addition to their regular news coverage. CNN is so-so. It's more commercially driven. It's owned by, big company. It's kind of more driven by money, so it's not as good. What about Fox News? I have Fox News here. Is that a good news source? If you don't know Fox News, it's a big media company in America. It's a cable news channel. They try to compete with CNN and such. First of all, Fox, it started as a cable network. No prior experience in news as a newspaper or news magazine. And another thing is, it's very biased. It's not so much about reporting news in depth, in detailed explanation and analysis or detailed coverage, but it's more about trying to convince you of particular things. It's mainly aimed at conservative Republicans, so it's trying to get you to, believe in conservative Republican ideas. It's more about propaganda or bias. It's more overtly biased. The quality of news coverage is very superficial, very simple, not detailed explanation, not detailed analysis. It's at a very general, superficial level, And I would have a problem with this, whether it's conservative or liberal. It just happens to be a very conservative outlet. And it's more about persuading people to a certain set of beliefs. Now, some other news services are known for a certain slight political slant, left or right, but they're still good news sources. For example, this is especially common in Europe and Latin America. If you're in Germany, and if you're more liberal, you probably read a German news magazine like Spiegel, or if you're conservative, you might read a newspaper like Frankfurter Allgemeine, the Frankfurt General, because they will maybe vary somewhat in how they cover news stories, and also in their particularly in their analysis or editorial or opinion pieces. But they still are focused on reporting news. They're still focused on good journalism, investigative journalism, and reporting facts and details carefully, even though they have a slight leftward or rightward slant. In the U.S., Wall Street Journal, their focus is more on business news, and they tend to have a more conservative slant. There's a economics and business news magazine called The Economist, tends to be more center. They generally have fair coverage, fair discussion of conservative and liberal ideas, and it's kind of centrist in the center, moderate. Washington Post, New York Times are known for having a bit of a left-leaning slant, but regardless of your political beliefs, you would hopefully still regard it as a good news source, because they do really good journalism, reporting, as not only just the raw reporting, but also investigative journalism and analysis pieces. So it's regular news reporting, investigative journalism where they investigate things and uncover new things on their own, especially things that people shouldn't be doing, and analysis pieces. Now so many of these sources here on page 104 in my book, many of these are professional sources. CNN, I think, is kind of in a gray area. It's kind of borderline. I wouldn't quite consider professional, but it's kind of close, because it's not as good quality, especially their website. In CNN US, the reporting on air, not very detailed or careful reporting. Fox News, definitely not. It's more propaganda. It's not very professional news coverage. If you go to my website, I've got some more sources, general news sources. So I've got a list of news sources here. I've got a more detailed list of news sources from around the world in what is, at the time I'm making this video, section 3.1 on the course website. ABC News, it's kind of a little bit better than CNN. Of course, it's based on a TV network news, so it's not as good as maybe some of the others that were originally newspapers and news magazines. I've got a lot of these are probably pretty good and professional. Some of them so-so, like CNN, maybe ABC News is kind of so-so, and such. And then below this on my website, I've got some international websites, international news sites. Some of these are in their local languages. Here, if you're interested. And if you come across Google News and Yahoo News, that's not an original news website. It's an aggregator. They pull news articles from other news services. Google News is really they just pull whatever is getting the most hits on a news topic at the moment. It could be from the New York Times, Washington Post, could be from Fox, it could be from CNN, or whatever. So that is not really a professional source. Google News and Yahoo News, they're not actually news sites. Then I've got a few magazines that are not really news magazines, they're commentaries, so watch out for those. New Republic, Nation, National Review, Weekly Standard, for example, they're not actually news magazines. It's political commentary, so you want to be careful about about using those. So a lot of these news outlets I have here on my website in the book, a lot of them are professional quality. Some are kind of in the gray area, between professional and popular, like some American TV news services here, kind of in the gray area. And of course, keep in mind, these are secondary sources. So I didn't get a chance to talk last time about secondary and primary sources. So getting back to a research journal, this is a primary source. Somebody's reporting their own research. This is my hypothesis. This is an experiment I did. These are the results of my experiment. When Steven Pinker writes his, book on, say, language as as an expert, some of it is he's kind of reporting what other people have done and kind of putting it together. So it's kind of a bit more secondary. So this is primary, a primary source, an original research publication. A lot of professional trade journals that I talked about earlier, like Journal for Educators and such like that, those are often secondary. It's not like original research, but it's a person who's maybe explaining the research. Here's a cool new article. Let me explain it to you so that you can use this information for teaching or for counseling. So a lot of these professional sources are more secondary sources of information. News articles are mostly secondary information. Sometimes it might be original information, like a person's own analysis that is published in the Wall Street Journal, or an interview that's published in, say, a news magazine. But it's mostly secondary. The reporter, the journalist, is reporting it to you, to us, and explaining what happened. This is what the president said. This is what the president did. This is what, they're reporting secondhand the news information that they have found. So news is largely is often secondhand in nature. Now, business news and financial news. Keep in mind, these tend to have a slight rightward bias, which in many cases may not matter for you. If you are doing a case study for your final, if you're doing something in my class that has something to do with a company or any kind of business aspect or technology aspect or stuff, such like that, you might want to look at these business and financial news sources. Again, these are pretty professional news sources. These are by journalists who have a lot of expertise in, say, business or finance or economics, practical experience too, and these tend to be pretty detailed in the way they report business news and finance and such things. And this could include information on economics, information on the economy, economic news, business news, information about companies, including stuff that might be relevant to you if you were doing a case study of a company. Sometimes they cover other topics. Sometimes they cover educational institutions and politics of education, things like that might be of interest to you. If you are doing a paper about some aspect of education, I'm looking at, say, university system. So these are good sources for a lot of things related to news. Not only the news itself, but also, again, good analytical pieces, good analysis articles about business and about the economy. Technology and IT news, I've got some here that are, some of these are professional, some of these are kind of more commercially oriented or general sources. Might be of interest to you if you are interested in technology topics. Finally, we have science news, and I'll include medical news in that too. Oh, I gotta really talk about this. This is important. All right, you hear on the news, a new study said, this is good for you, you should eat this, or this is bad for you, you shouldn't eat that. Do you believe it? Okay. Everything I said about news sources, you have to kind of be careful when it comes to news reporting about science and health. New research about health or science and what's good for you and what's bad for you, here you have to be really careful. There's a lot of bad information out there. The worst is the stuff that's on the internet and social media. Some of these news outlets that I've talked about, they might be really good for general news, political news, business news, and stuff, what's happening in the world. When it comes to science and medicine, maybe, maybe not. If they have a professional science journalist or a professional medical journalist who knows science or medicine and health, then okay. They can interpret, they can understand the research and explain it to you in a way that makes sense, along with cautions. Because, let me explain why. Let's pretend I'm a medical researcher, I'm working at a university, a big university. Universities have their PR, public relations departments. So maybe I'm doing medical research or psychology research, and it sounds cool. I did a study that says this is bad for your heart. Or I did a study that says, well, doing this is really good for raising your children to be healthier. And the PR department will pick it up. And these are stupid people who don't know anything about science or medicine. And I'm sorry to be so blunt, but this is true. This is a frustration of mine. A frustration that is also expressed by people in the scientific community and medical community. And it's not just PR people, PR university departments, public relations departments. But anyway, so it might be the university PR department hears about some cool sounding research that one of their professors or PhD students or researchers has done. And without really understanding the science or the medicine, they will release this information to the general news media. It gets filtered and dumbed down a lot by PR people at the university. And then it goes to some general news media outlet, and where the journalists probably don't know about science or medicine and how science works. And they report it on the air. This is good for you. You should eat it, this scientist says. And the scientist would say, no, I didn't say that. Or, this is bad for your children. Don't do that. And the scientist or the psychologist will say, no, that's not what I said. That's not what I said. So the message gets distorted significantly. And then you, general public person, you read this and go, oh no, I should stop eating that. Or, oh, I should buy that stuff and eat it. It's good for me. No, that's not what I said, says the scientist. No, it's not how it works. So oftentimes, whether it's linguistics, psychology, medicine, health, whatever, we'll often do like a simple study with like 30 subjects, 30 people, because it's a convenient number. It's easy to do. It's not too expensive to do this. And in terms of the statistics, how you do the kind of inferential statistics I talked about last time, it kind of works okay for like a small group of people. But that's like an initial study. One study does not ever prove anything in science. Whether it's linguistics, psychology, or medicine, or biology, one study does not prove anything. It's just one study. Maybe there's something weird about my 30 subjects, or something I didn't account for. Maybe there's some other factor I didn't control. Once I publish, my study is just an exploratory study. And other scientists are going to want to, what we call replicate it. They want to do it too, and maybe with 200 subjects, and look at different possible factors, maybe factors I couldn't look at, or factors I didn't think of in my first study. This is how science works, science, medicine, whatever. It takes a number of studies by a number of different researchers to really show, oh, this X causes Y, or X does something. Or it could be just like there's a correlation, like X, the amount of X is related to the amount of Y. The number of almonds I eat might be related to like my blood pressure. It doesn't mean that the almonds affect my blood pressure. It could be something else. Correlation is not causation. So you need multiple studies to show that something is really happening, and you need studies to show, okay, why is it happening? If people eat more almonds, how does that affect their blood pressure or their cholesterol? How? You need an explanation. And it's only after enough studies have been done to look at different possible factors, other factors, that then the scientific community will agree, yes, this is a thing. And only then would it really be appropriate for the news media to report it. And if a study comes along that contradicts another study, does the news media report it? No. Does, let's say one year the your newspaper, it's all over the internet, some study about almonds and cholesterol, just to make up an example. And people go, oh wow, I should buy more almonds, or I shouldn't eat almonds. And then the next year, another study comes out that contradicts the previous study because it was a better done study. Is the news media going to come out and say, oh, do you remember that thing we told you last year about almonds and cholesterol? Sorry, we were wrong. There's another study that came out and said it's not true. Forget it. No, they don't do that. They're trying to make money. So they want to get you to click on their articles and make advertising money, make money from advertisements. So if there's a cool sounding study, almonds affect your cholesterol, or this affects your heart, or this affects how long you'll live, or this is good for your kids, they're going to put that out there. And if something comes along that contradicts it, they're not going to tell you. Nah. Like, oh, do you remember that study last year we talked about? We put it all on our front page of our newspaper. We're sorry, it's wrong. Another, scientist did a better study. No, they don't do that. They'll just go with something that's clickbait, like they bait you to click on their news link. This is the problem with science news. So be careful with science and health news. You want to either get it, if it's from a major news outlet, you want to make sure it's from like a proper science news journalist or medical journalist who actually understands the stuff and can explain it to you properly. This is a big study, but we need more research before we can really say for sure. The best thing, though, is to go to proper news sources, science news sources, and medical news sources like these on my website. These are by professional science journalists who know the science. They can read the original research and understand it, and they explain it to us properly. So it's better to get science news from a science journalist, whether it's a science journalist with, say, the New York Times, or better, a proper science journalist from a proper science news site or medical news site or health news site. So be careful with medical and health news, especially because we make sometimes buying decisions or decisions about our lifestyle based on what we hear in the news about health, health research or medical research. This is good for you, this is bad for you. We have to be careful how we get our information, because a lot of mass media companies are more interested in making money than in carefully reporting health and science news. And a lot of times they don't know how to report it properly or explain it properly. So it's better if you get news on such topics from proper science or medical journalists or proper science or health news websites like those here on my website, so that you don't repeat dumb stuff. It's also frustrating because you probably have relatives or friends that say, oh, I read in the news that you should eat this. This is good for your brain. Nonsense. If this were good for your brain, everybody would be eating it and would be smarter by now. Obviously, you are not smarter because you believe whatever you hear on the internet. Okay, old professor ranting here. This really bothers me. Okay, and on my website here, I've got a few professional trade journals, especially education and related fields, education, psychology stuff. There's another list from Wikipedia here that's linked here. I've got a few academic research journals too here on my website related to language education. Some of these might be more readable for you as English majors. All right, enough of my ranting for today. Let's see, what are we going to do next time? It sort of builds off of what I was just talking about, health and science news. I've got an example article in my book. It's called Laughter is the Best Medicine. It's on page 85 or something like that. You should probably read that. I'm going to kind of talk through some points about that, how to understand such articles, because it's an example of exposition. We'll talk about exposition next time and analysis. Okay, so that's kind of my overview of professional sources. So again, you've got heavy academic sources, your professional sources, and your popular sources. And the professional sources are more likely the things that you can probably read and understand. Some academic sources maybe you can use and understand too. But for professional sources, again, you've got these kinds of science news sites, business news sites, more reputable general news sites, that is from kind of more world famous news outlets that have a good reputation for the quality of their reporting, and of course trade journals and such. And some of these are listed on the course website. So I hope that helps you. So I'm going through all of this because you should start thinking about your final topic. You're going to do a case study. You're going to profile, pick a particular company or business, maybe one that you might like to work for someday. This could be a good way of kind of learning more about the company so you can apply for the job there, and during the interview you can really impress them with your knowledge of the company. Or it could be an organization, non-governmental organization, government agency, a particular university, education institution, education program, anything like that can be a good case study for your final. And so I'm talking about sources that will be relevant to your final project. So just as you've gotten over the midterm, yes, I'm asking you to start thinking about the final. Not too much stress, okay? Not too much stress, okay? But giving you plenty of time to start thinking about this so it won't be too stressful. All right, so I think that's it for today. Next time we'll talk about exposition, then analytical writing, analytical pieces. Until then, have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.